Welcome to Masters of Product Management, a show that gives you real-world techniques, cutting-edge strategies, and extraordinary insights for product managers who want to go faster and farther in their product management careers. Now, here's the master himself, Stephen Haines.
Welcome back, everyone, to Masters of Product Management. I'm Stephen Haines. So, as most of you know, I'm the founder of a company called Sequent Learning Networks, and we're a company that provides training and resources to product managers and for leaders of product organizations. Today, I want to talk about entrepreneurship and both my journey and the journey of some other folks. My journey in entrepreneurship started a little bit later in life because a lot of my research indicated that product management was not well understood or inconsistently deployed in big companies. And I thought that there was a play there for me. And I used to think about, well, why me? And I remember saying to myself, well, why not me? And there's a message in there. So that said, it occurs to me that all entrepreneurs, whether they start a company, usually start with a product idea. And it's like the product and the company become one entity. And it's usually the founder that has some kind of an idea based on some unmet market need, and then they build their product and the company in lockstep, in unison. And my guests are not allowed to laugh. However, but this is the beauty of this, right? But really, if you step back, product managers and entrepreneurs have a tremendous amount in common, and what leaders tell me is that they want product managers to have this entrepreneurial bent. Now, with this thing in mind, what I want to do with this show is introduce you to Bob Caporale and Tate Tegtmeier. Bob is the president of our company, Sequent Learning Networks, and Tate is responsible for marketing at Sequent, well, among other things, because that's what happens in a small company when you're in marketing. But anyway, we're going to talk about their podcast called Making It Real. And that's a podcast that they started that it features real stories from product entrepreneurs. And oh, by the way, I absolutely love this podcast, and we'll find out from them later how we can actually introduce you to that. But welcome, Bob, and welcome, Tate. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen. Appreciate it.
It's great. It's great. Anyway, what I think our listeners are really interested in is sort of your own motivation, because it's almost like the podcast itself has an entrepreneurial streak to it. So what was the overall catalyst, and why did you start it?
Well, you want me to take this, Tate?
Yeah, take it away, Bob.
Okay. So, we started, as you know, thinking that, hey, we train product managers as part of Sequent, and part of the message is that product managers have to be like mini business owners, right? They have to be the general managers of their product and have an entrepreneurial spirit and own their products and all these types of things. But we realize in going into these companies that a lot of product managers don't necessarily know what that looks like. Many of them have not had their own businesses or maybe didn't have exposure to that type of a mindset. So, hey, let's start a podcast and let's go and interview entrepreneurs so that we can show product managers what that mindset looks like. So that was kind of the initial thought process. As it turns out, there's about 1 million other podcasts out there that do that. And what we ended up starting to do, because we were trying to show product managers what to do, is we featured people that had companies that were started from product ideas or product inventions. And then the show started to morph into being as much about the products as about the entrepreneurial mind and kind of bringing that together. And that's where it is right now. So I don't know, Tate, if you have anything to add, but.
No, that's exactly what I would have said. And honestly, it has been so fun and interesting to hear the stories of other people who are kind of taking the bull by the horns and creating this idea that they had and actually bringing it to life, like listening to their light bulb moments. And we all know that you guys have them. Everybody has that idea, but what do you do with it? And experiencing the journey along with these people as they tell their story. I mean, it's so much fun to listen to, and listening back, I think it's a great resource for product managers and entrepreneurs to learn along the way.
It's really interesting. You said something like, the show morphed, and everything that we do is really about morphing. I used to say to people, even, when I started the company and over the years, when people would come in and say, here's what the direction is, but, we will evolve and pivot as time goes on. And so it goes with the product podcast, if you will. But I have to tell you, in some of the podcasts I've listened to, and I really do enjoy listening to them, and I like your banter, and I like the guests that you have, and I like the energy. But I got to tell you, there are some tremendous stories. I would love for each of you to share with our audience some of the best stories that you've heard and how that might actually apply.
Yeah,
Ooh.
well, that's a tough one because there's so many
good ones.
There is. And, what ends up happening is I think you start to see the same pattern over and over again. It was actually one of the things we were afraid of, right, is that, we ask people for what advice would you give and what is your story? And the stories end up being, by and large, very similar. And, if you were going to summarize it, you'd say someone had an idea. They go do a search to see if that idea has been invented before. Then they go and do some type of a patent search, either through friends or they hire a lawyer or something, right? And then they Google as to how to get things manufactured. And
that's right. He did say Google, like as simple as the free resource of typing in google.com.
Yeah, literally. And then they find out how to manufacture it, and then they go ahead and do that, and they run into all kinds of problems, and then they realize that they actually have to market the thing, and then they market it sometimes, and then it becomes a success because it actually met a customer need. But what I think is interesting in all of those stories, the thing that always fascinates me is how easy, at least they make it seem like, right? To me, that sounds like it's so overwhelming. And I think maybe that's because I have the same corporate background that a lot of the product managers do that listen to this show, where I was never exposed to that world. So I always, thought it was like such a huge thing to get products manufactured and, get an idea out into the world. But in fact, it's really not. So I would kind of put all of them together and say that fascinates me. Every time I hear an entrepreneur talk about how easy the process is, and I'm not saying it doesn't come without problems. It comes with a lot of problems and a lot of stress. But I think it's just not as overwhelming to do it as I would have thought. So that's kind of my thought. I have examples, but Tate, I don't know if you have one that comes to mind.
Well, I'm kind of, you really go after the process and how they did it, and I kind of always comment on the funny quirks and pick up on the funny quirks of different stories. So my favorite, of course, is the most recent glamping episode.
Oh, yeah.
When
glamping?
Glamping,
Yeah.
which is glamorous camping. And this founder, Sarah Dusick, tells a story of flying a porcelain toilet over a mountaintop to get it to a corporate retreat. And it's always that moment of like pure passion that it would make doing something that crazy okay and logical. And I of course, I love all of the stories where people are taking a problem that they had and they all of a sudden have turned it into this huge innovation that'll eventually change the world, like the way Yair Ranier is changing the way people are cooking every day with his fry wall. Like, it's just these innovations that I think could eventually change the way people do things. And the passion behind it is so exciting that I could just go on with all the different little quirks that everyone has, and those become my favorite.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I would say like my favorite one probably, of course, I'm a musician, audio guy, right?
Of course. I should have picked up on this.
Yeah,
I thought
so-
this would be your favorite.
So we had the CEO of a company called IZotope, which, Stephen, IZotope. We've done
course.
business with them through Sequent and so forth as well. But we had Mark Ethier on the show, who's the CEO of that company. He founded the company, co-founded the company, I should say. And they're established. I mean, they're a well-known force in the software industry, in music software in particular. And the company's formidable. It's a formidable size. It's really well known, has a great reputation, been around a while. So he was a little later in the entrepreneurial journey than some of the people we have on the show. And what I thought was so amazing about his story is how he had to have so much self-awareness and so much humility over time and had to admit some of his shortcomings every time they grew to a point where he knew he couldn't do things the way that he did them before. And he realized over time how important it was to pay attention to the team and pay attention to the group and pay attention to the assets that are his people. And I just thought that was really incredible because there's a lot of ego that goes along with entrepreneurship sometime. And he just had a really humble approach that I think reflects in the products as well. So I just love that.
Well, so that hits really close to home for me, right? Because
that's why I said it.
Well,
you mean flying a porcelain toilet over a mountain doesn't hit home for you?
Not that we're on the topic here, but it's really, it's a really important thing having these epiphanies, right? In terms of, having to pivot. And even when you're operating in an entrepreneurial setting and you believe you are, just wait a minute, because what is staring you at the face is not always something that you know how to respond to. And of course, we know what I'm talking about here because it's sort of inside the family thing. But the fact is that you're right. It's about having people who see things through sets of lenses that allow a company to grow and to prosper. But along with that, and I tie this back to entrepreneurialness, if you will, because the people who are operating in those companies who have garnered success and encountered even barriers can continuously remake themselves. But I want to step back for 1 second, because I thought about, well, we also talk in this podcast to people who work in large, complex companies. And as I opened up, I said, bosses want product managers to be more entrepreneurial. But in big companies, and we all work there, right? It's a very risk-averse environment, and there are these two conflicting streams of thought. One is, I have to try to be that way, and the other is, well, how can I be that way if my hands feel tied? Is there anything that you could share with our listeners that can talk specifically to maybe how they might be able to navigate in that arena?
Yeah, well, I'll start with that one. I mean, that was another aha moment for me, as I expected when we started talking to these product entrepreneurs and inventors and people who brought products to market, with their own companies, that they were all going to be kind of, throw it all to the wind and just, go out there without any care about failure or these other things. Because, this is a hot button for me, right? Is that I consider myself pretty risk averse. So I always thought, well, that's probably why I wouldn't do it. But in fact, when you talk to a lot of these people, that you realize that many of them are risk averse. And that was interesting for me. I think what happens is that the passion ends up overriding that
Yes.
feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they're so passionate about what they do. They feel so strongly about their product idea and what it could do for the world that even though it is risky in some ways, that they're going to overcome that and go do it no matter what. But it's not without research, and it's not without, taking some time to make sure there's a market for it and make sure that they do their homework and look at the competitive environment. So they're not just kind of running out onto the battlefield without any of that information. They're actually doing it. But any fear that they have is overridden by the passion. So I think that was kind of a really interesting aha moment for me as well. Mm-hmm. Now, you take that to a product manager in a company, and I think sometimes, frankly, that passion is what's missing, right? Mm-hmm. So they end up not taking any risks because they're not as passionate as they should be about their products. Now, I'm not saying that all product managers are like that, but as you know, we see that a lot. So that's kind of my thought. Tate, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Actually, that was what I was going on, was the passion thing. Quite honestly, that's a running theme in our podcast, and that's something we hear over and over again. Okay, why did you do this? Or just even the comments that they make, you can just hear the passion come through the microphone from them. Even without seeing their face, you can tell that that's something they're ready to throw themselves over the line for. And I mean, it's admirable for sure.
Yeah. And but product managers need to have that same passion. And if they don't, then guess what? They're never going to take the risk. They're always going to be afraid of losing their job or whatever else. And then those companies are, frankly, not going to bring these brand new great ideas to market. Who is going to do it are the smaller companies, right? And that's what I think happens by and large in a lot of cases.
Sure. I've always found, even in my corporate life, passion was the thing that allowed me to move forward. And I remember one of my bosses said, you're just like, you're a brute force kind of a guy. And it made it, I said, I don't think I'm a brute force kind of a guy. I just see things that other people don't see. And it's not like I was hallucinating or something like that, but it was just that I saw things that were possible and I just made them happen. And my bosses actually, or the bosses of the bosses, tended to recognize that and overlook some of the, maybe it wasn't as politically finessed as it could have been, but the results were what was wanted.
Yeah. And I would tell you, I think that you have a lot of passion for what you do. And I think, you had success in the corporate world. And I think it's probably because you were always passionate about the companies you worked for. And the same with me. I mean, I had success in the corporate world, but I could tell you, every product that I was ever responsible for, it was like it was my own. And even to this day, I follow the products. I still give feedback to the product managers for those companies that I work for. Like, I own them. I love the companies that I worked for. And I think that's what's required if you want to have some success as a product manager.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I was quite the opposite.
What's that?
I said I was quite the opposite. I never really worked for a corporation.
Right,
Just
but you work here and you have that same passion,
I do.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it.
I hope, anyway.
Well, since my two bosses are on the line.
No, that's not.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
But even Tate, you had something that was going on in your background that caused you to be entrepreneurial. What was that about?
Well, I think it's like a bunch of the entrepreneurs that are on our show is that we had a problem and recognized that and really felt passionately about fixing it and thought that it was something that our customers would respond to, in which case was a vinyl decal for equestrian gear. So it was exactly that, like also something for product managers. As an entrepreneur, you're usually so connected to your customer because you're so proud of your product that you almost want to see it in action, like Bob was talking about, or even get their feedback. So I think that's something that helps them drive that to that success. You're constantly staying connected to see what your customer would want next or what would help solve that problem that you originally experienced, and to see if other people are experiencing that problem. And when you find that product that does that, it's like an overwhelming moment of joy.
This is all very interesting, and a lot of it is. I think I remember reading something or reading an article or a book. I can't remember. It was called I know. It was Guy Kawasaki, and he wrote a book I think called The Art of Start. And a lot of entrepreneurial people are passionate about the start. But I wanted to find out if you've encountered in the podcast where people had to really get into not only a sustaining mode, but really scaling a business. Are there some characteristics that product managers can think about with respect to scaling past the start? And that would be past the new product, what has helped the company become successful?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would tell you that there's two things that come up over and over again. And one is manufacturing, right? And you can call that anything you want. I mean, it's the operations of the business by and large. So once you have the idea, you have a prototype. I'm not going to say that's easy, but it tends to be more something that people can control a little bit more. But then you have to go and find a way to manufacture it. And then you realize how much it can't be manufactured. And that's where problem number one starts. So, when you're scaling something, you have to make sure that this is something that can be manufactured on an industrial scale, and many times overseas outside of your immediate control. And that ends up becoming a problem. The second one for me is marketing, right? I mean, we hear it over and over again, is that build it and they will come rarely works. I mean, there's a couple of stories where something goes viral or whatever, but even that, it's short-lived. I mean, people who don't spend money on marketing or don't have a unique message, it's very difficult to scale the business. So that's kind of what I've learned from the podcast.
That's what Kelly Roach said in her episode from Kelly Roach Consulting. She said, if you don't spend money on marketing, it's like putting a gas or getting ready to go on a road trip without gas in your car.
Yeah.
And that sticks with me to this day. It was like, oh my gosh, what an interesting analogy. It's so funny that you say that, Bob.
Yeah, and we had another one, Thor Ernsten from Alpha, who I don't know, someone from Alpha was on your podcast too, right, Stephen?
Mm-hmm, yes, they were.
Yeah, but great company, and he was a great guest too. But he said something, I won't quote it exactly, but something to the effect of, what small companies are good at are bringing new products to market that, really resonate with customers and meet customer needs and those kinds of things. But what large companies are good at are scaling, right? And so that's why a lot of times the larger companies don't come up with brand new innovative things, and the smaller companies aren't able to scale, so large companies buy them up and scale it, right? And so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing too, because it takes a lot of resource to scale, and not every entrepreneur is ready to go get that level of investment or take that level of risk at that point. So they end up selling, and there's nothing wrong with that, I guess, but that does happen,
Well, it's interesting also because I belong to some networks, like the Founders Institute and some organizations like that help entrepreneurs get up off the ground. And very often in some of the presentations I'm giving, the other people I'm presenting with are serial entrepreneurs. They start a company, they sell a company. They start a company, and they sell a company. And to me, I would find that incredibly nerve-wracking, right?
Yeah.
And it seems to me on your podcast, not these people are bringing products to market, but their intent seems to be to build real companies, not to build something that somebody else has to take, to another level, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and I'd say even a little bit differently that what they really care about is like the product and the solution that the problem that they're trying to solve. So many of them aren't necessarily interested in running big companies or making, gazillions of dollars. It's like they saw a need for something. They want to bring that product to life. It's almost like they're creators, It's like an artist, me with the music, right? I mean, I love the process of building something from nothing, right? Like you have an idea and you bring it into life, whether it's music or art or a product. But I think that's a different skill set than, running a business or wanting to grow a multi-billion-dollar industry, which I would 100%. Go out on a limb and say many of these people don't care about that,
No, well, they want
which is interesting.
A lot of the people on our show actually admit that. I mean, to an extent, if they have the scalability, they want to stay close to their customers. They want to keep it kind of low key and keep it to the point where they can continue to reconnect and recreate without having to go and be this huge corporation. But with that being said, we also have a lot of people who have gotten funding. And a lot of people are on Shark Tank. They've gotten funding from Kickstarter. They've reached out to investors and private equity firms and have done really well and started to scale it. So you do have an interesting spread of people for sure.
Yeah, and then you have a whole different set of problems, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which is interesting.
That is true. They tend to brush over the creating part and then start going into the, oh my gosh, now we're at the point of, what do we do?
Yeah, and some of them don't make it past it. Like they've done this 3 or 4 times because they don't want to get past that scaling part, right? They just want to keep creating, which is another dynamic.
Gee, I never heard of that before.
Yeah, right.
But it's what's interesting as well as I'm thinking about what we're all talking about, and that is, customer problems and market problems morph. All right. One of the things that I've learned about customer needs is that they are detected in a state. But customers' need states continue to evolve so that there's this transientness that takes place. And what I've seen is that people who are entrepreneurial have market nimbleness built into their wiring. And I think even a Jeff Bezos has that in his mind, except what he's great at is conceiving of these things and then allowing people to run those dimensions of their business. Have you encountered a place where a founder was really able to do that? And we talked a little bit before about having other people operate, but is there a company example that you can talk about where somebody is really, really scaling and able to capture those evolving user needs or customer needs?
I mean, I think the best example on our show, we tend to focus on people that are earlier in that journey and maybe smaller product entrepreneurs. But the one that I mentioned before, IZotope, I mean, that one is, like I said, that's a company that's scaled and so forth. And to get past that part, because he was a developer and he ended up, developing the first software, helping develop the first software that company came up with. But there was a point where it got big enough where decisions had to be made. And, there were even decisions between him and the other co-founders and whether they wanted to stay on, and they didn't, right? And so he ended up taking it to the scaling. But it's almost like, and I don't want to speak for him, but I got the impression it was almost like they reinvented the company, right? It was like there was a turning point where they said, hey, we have to decide, are we going to get bigger or not? And he decided to take it to get it bigger, but it's almost like it was a different company after that. And that showed in the marketplace too. So that was probably the only one I can think of that really got bigger. I don't know, Tate, did you remember any other ones? Or
I think that we have had plenty of big companies on, but I think that's the best example for that. I don't know if we've seen anybody that has totally scaled like that.
Yeah.
We've had some licensing deals, but nothing...
Nothing huge. And I think that's honestly because of this thing that we were talking about. Like, it is a different skill set. Even, we had on the founder of UGG, the boots, right? We had them on, I don't know if this will air before that one, so I won't give away too much, but it was the same thing. Now, UGG is $1 billion brand, but he only took it to, some tens of millions, if I recall.
Right.
And then he sold it to someone who could scale it into the $1 billion brand that it is today. And then he went on to do something else. So I see that as kind of a consistent theme, that people who like to bring these products to market only want to take it to a certain point and then go do it again. That seems to be what I see.
And you know what? This is kind of reminding me of an episode from Sprout Pencils. And I think Michael talked about, he purchased the company from a small group of college students who created this pencil that has seeds on the end so you can recycle the pencil and replant it. And he said a good founder knows when their skill set has grown to a certain point and when they need to hand it off to the next person to grow it further. And I don't think that could ring to be more true.
That's true. And when we interviewed him, he had just kind of stepped down.
Right. He knew.
Because of this.
He felt that. And I think exactly what you're talking about, Bob. People feel that passion for starting something new. And then I think after a while, you have to redo that to get that passion again. Yeah. It's hard to run a company.
Yeah, it is. Yep. That's true.
Well, I fully understand that. There was one, we talk about this word passion a lot, but there's another word that it's another P word. And that's something I've observed in terms of some entrepreneurs, and that is persistence. That there's this sort of this blind or intoxicating perspective that says, I'm going to run to the wall. I'm going to keep running and I'm not going to stop. Can that be a help or hindrance to product managers in a big company?
I mean, it depends on what's driving that persistence. I think it comes back down to passion, right? If passion is driving that persistence, then man, that's going to do it. And I see this with you, Stephen. I mean, you're one of the most passionate people about product managers that I've ever met and product management. And I'm not just saying that because, we're in the same company or on a podcast talking to our audience. But at the end of the day, it really is true. You really do care about this thing so much so that you could be blinded sometimes, right? Yeah. Because the passion overrides so much. But if your persistence is based on your own gain, then I think it is a detriment. And I do see that sometimes in big corporations. People are more concerned with their career or making a lot of money and this and that. And then that persistence, although it can be valuable, it can also be a hindrance because it's coming from the wrong place. It's got to be about what you're doing for your customers, what you're doing for someone else.
There you go.
That's it, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right too. And so I want to segue into sort of some concluding thoughts, and that is, if there are product managers who are listening to this podcast, and many of them, they listen to other podcasts, and I'm sure they have a lot of this coming at them. But one of the things that we really try to do here on Masters of Product Management is fine-tune recommendations. What are some key takeaways that you would recommend from the things that you've learned in your podcast that could be really helpful to product managers?
Well, for me, and this is a bit skewed probably by the fact that my day job is spending time with product managers, right? I spend 70% of my time with product managers, training them and working with them and so forth. So I have a really good angle on this outside of even the podcast. But the big takeaway that I would have for product managers that I work with is that, if you're not passionate and it's just a job for you with a paycheck, I don't think you're going to have as much success as you're looking for. What I would say you could learn from the product entrepreneurs that we talk to is that they care. I mean, they care about the solution. They care about the customers. They care about the product.
Well, for them, it's do or die.
Yeah.
Either do that or not survive as a company.
Or not. And that's one part of it. But I also think that it's just like some of them don't even think about that because they care so much, right? And I think both of those things are valid. But I don't see enough of that in corporate because, okay, you're working for someone else, whatever. There's a million excuses that you give to yourself. But you know what? If you don't care about the products and all you care about is getting the paycheck, go find another job because honestly, you're probably not going to succeed as a product manager in the company you're in. And those are strong words, but I really do believe that,
Well, and I agree with you. And it's really interesting. And I went from a stodgy, large communications company to a very nimble software company and as the last job in my corporate life. And what I found was that you can really make a difference if you really care deeply enough. And we talk about things like leadership and guiding our teams and expressing our vision and all these kinds of things. And some product managers think, well, I just can't do it in my company. And to me, I call BS, because I think you can. I think that there is a tremendous amount that we as product people can do to drive other people, to help them see things, as long as we have it backed up by data, by things that we really have seen in the marketplace, by customers we've talked to, by data we've analyzed. And so it's those conclusions, it's those driving thoughts that will get people moving in the same direction. And I think that that's what happens with entrepreneurs. They literally infect people with that enthusiasm and passion. And I think that that's really some important takeaways from the show today. We've talked about things like morphing and passion and persistence and prototypes, lots of P's, right? And scaling. All of these things mixed together in this melting pot of your mind, if you will, that allows you as a product manager to really take your job, take your products business to a level that is like what a startup company would do as they're scaling. And I think that that's really remarkable. And so, Bob and Tate, that was really just an amazing conversation. Before I sign off, is there a place where people can find your podcast? Would you be able to share that link with them?
Oh, Tate.
Yes.
Give it to them.
Love this. Please come out and listen, talk to us, engage with us, put a contact form out, something, tell us you're there. You can visit us at makingitreal.net, and you can find us on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, anywhere you listen to your podcast, anywhere you listen to Masters of Product Management, you will find us. So that's makingitreal.net, and we also have an Instagram as well. So comment, follow us, give us some love.
And that's Making It Real Pod is the Instagram, right?
That's right.
But if you go to iTunes or now it's called Apple Podcasts, but whatever it is, and any of the podcast aggregators of choice, I mean, we're on everything, Spotify, all of them. But just type in Making It Real and you'll see where the show with the light bulb, right? So that's the one that comes up. And the tagline is Stories from Product Entrepreneurs. So it can't get more descriptive than that, I would say.
Not too shabby, not too shabby. Well, as with yours, Masters of Product Management is also available on all your favorite channels. And if you have a topic that you'd like me to discuss or interested in training, coaching, or other product management resources, please reach out to me through the contact form at Sequent Learning Networks. And be sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks a lot for listening today, and see you next time on Masters of Product Management.
You've been listening to Masters of Product Management with Stephen Haines. If you'd like to take your career to the next level with additional tools, training, coaching, and books, be sure to visit Sequent Learning Networks at sequentlearning.com.